I'm so blessed to be able to be here with you this morning. Like Janelle said, my name is Jordan, and she is correct. Nick and I go way back. I've known Nick and Johanna for almost a decade now, which is crazy for me to think. And Nick has been a great friend to me, and Johanna as well to me and my wife. Nick has been a mentor to me, so if this morning you're not impressed with what I have to say, you can blame it on Nick, all right? And I will too. We'll all blame Nick. It'll be great. No, but I'm very blessed to be here. I was actually just sitting next to David, and as Janelle was talking about, he's like, that's crazy that you guys ended up in Truckee from Seattle, and then the Delgardinos ended up in Reno, just 30 minutes away. Like, yes, it is crazy, and I just feel very blessed by their friendship. And I'm sure that you guys have been able to experience that blessing as well through the Delgardinos. And so I'm just so pleased to be here and excited because I think it's a beautiful thing when people from different churches can gather together and serve Jesus and do it together. And so I'm so, again, I'm going to keep saying it, but I'm very honored to be here with you this morning and looking at God's Word. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to Luke chapter 12. When Nick and I were talking about it, he was telling me about this series, Summer Road Trips, and said this is be the chapter that I'll be teaching from. And as I was rereading it and getting back into Luke chapter 12, it's been very challenging for me and also inspiring and encouraging in a lot of ways, and I hope that could be the case for you this morning as well. Nick and I, we were in youth ministry together. He was my boss for a while at the church we served at in the Seattle area. And we did a lot of crazy trips together. We did a lot of crazy road trips all the time. One of the things that we did was summer camps, that every summer we would put together our own middle school and high school camps. And we would go into these like remote camps out. One of them was in Eastern Washington. One of them was on the Oregon coast. And we would bring our stage and all this equipment and game stuff. And it was a big production, okay? And so we had to rent this giant, basically, semi-truck and a trailer and fill it up, and it would just take so much time and effort to put it all together. And so we would do that, and then we had this bright idea that we should do them back to back. So our middle school camp would happen 1 week, and then we'd have about a day and a half to move all that stuff to another city 6 hours away and set it all up again and do another week of camp. Right? We were smart. And so we did that. And on the way to our first camp, Nick drove that big semi-truck with everything in it. We trusted him. He knew what he was doing. And he nailed it. He did great, right? On the way back, he went with our middle schoolers back to the church and handed me the keys, which was the first mistake, all right? And so now I'm driving this giant semi-truck down these windy roads of Eastern Washington into Oregon. And with me in the car is another leader who volunteered with middle school. And if you volunteer with middle school, if you can put up with middle schoolers, honor on you, honor on your family, on your cow, everything, right? Middle schoolers can be tough, right? So I had this leader who was doing both middle school and high school camp with me, and he was riding in the car, and he was just wiped out from those middle schoolers. So he had a big pillow that he was leaning up against the window of the passenger's side. And he's sleeping, and I'm driving, all right? I'm staying awake and driving this big vehicle. And at some point, he opens his eyes up and does one of these little things and says, "Do you smell smoke?" I say, "Yeah, I do." That's weird. Look at the temperature gauge, and it seems fine. Like, can't be us, right? Must be the car in front of us. Must be something else. He's like, "Yeah, maybe, but it seems really close." And so as he starts to sit up and his pillow falls, I can see smoke, just tons of smoke filling the passenger window next to us. And I learned a couple lessons at that point as we pulled off. Turns out that there was something wrong with the brake on the front right brake, and I don't know how to drive a really large vehicle. Going down vehicles, what I learned, and you guys know this, you would never... You know exactly how to drive a large vehicle, I'm sure. But I'll tell you for my sake. I was driving down this vehicle and driving down these hills, and I didn't realize you need to pump the brakes. I was just holding the brakes for a long time on it. And what that does, I found out, is it melts the brakes. And so I'd melted almost the entire pad off of this brake, and then it was metal on metal, and it was just like sparks and smoke, and it was crazy, and we ended up being stuck on the side of the road for a long time until we could get someone out there to come repair the vehicle, and it was awful. Now, like I said, you've probably never had that happen to you. You know exactly how to drive a semi-truck. You're smarter than me. But you probably have had something similar where there was a problem in your life. There's something going on. There's a struggle that you were having. There's a place you wanted to be, but there was something blocking your view. There's something blocking you from being able to see the next step, from being able to see the problem in order to solve it. You've probably had a time where there's someone's big head or something else blocking your view. And I want to talk about that this morning because, as silly as that illustration is, driving a large semi-truck, that can happen in things like your career, as you're trying to figure out what is the next step in my career, where do I need to be next, how do I continue to grow in this area, and you're not quite sure. It seems like there's something in the way, something blocking you from getting to that next step. Maybe it's been in a relationship for you. Maybe you know you need to forgive somebody. You want to forgive them, but you're not exactly sure what it is that's keeping you from really being able to. There's just something blocking you. Or maybe this morning, it's spiritual, and it's in your relationship with God. Maybe at some point in your life, you felt like you could hear God really clearly, and you could see Jesus in the way that he was guiding you and directing you. But maybe lately, it's been harder. Like something's in the way, that you can't see Jesus as clearly as you used to, and you're not hearing him like you did before. And if that's you, I think there's something really good that we'll hear from Jesus this morning as he interacts with a man, that he quickly is able to analyze that this man has something blocking him from seeing Jesus right in front of him. And I think what Jesus had for that man could also be incredibly valuable for you and I today, almost 2,000 years later. So we're going to read from Luke chapter 12, verse 13. We're going to cover a lot of ground this morning, so we'll kind of try to move quickly through a lot of these verses. But what's been happening in the previous verses is Jesus is teaching, going from town to town teaching, and tons and tons of people start to show up. And they're realizing that this man, Jesus, has some sort of authority. He's different. He's teaching things that they had not heard before. He's teaching in a way that other teachers weren't teaching. And they want to see what's going on. They want to find out what's happening. And they hear of all the miraculous things happening, and so the crowd gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the previous chapter, we start to see that other teachers are getting a little nervous about this guy, and so they want to show up and see what's going on too. And so there's all this commotion going around, and people wanting to come see what Jesus has to say. And so if you look in verse 13 with me, we'll start reading there. It says in verse 13, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbitrator between you?" All right, we're going to stop right there for a second. We'll read, and then we'll stop, and we'll talk about it, just so we're all on the same page, all right? Does that sound good? So Jesus is teaching. There's a huge crowd around him. It says thousands of people are gathering around him, and a man yells out a valid question, right? He's looking for some help. He sees Jesus as an authoritative figure. He's hearing Jesus teach and share all these things for a little while. And he's like, this guy knows what he's talking about. This guy can help me out. And it was common practice in those days for people to go to rabbis and ask the rabbis to help them solve different disputes and stuff because they believed in their wisdom, they believed in their authority, their understanding of the scriptures. And so they would ask them these questions and ask them to help solve these disputes. So this man sees Jesus as a teacher. He says it right here. He says, "Teacher, tell my brother to split the inheritance with me." And Jesus' response on first reading seems a little odd, doesn't it? He says, "What are you doing? I'm not a judge. I'm not your arbitrator. Why are you asking me this?" It's as if it seems almost like Jesus doesn't care about the situation with him. It's like Jesus not validating the situation. What's going on? Why wouldn't Jesus just help this guy out and answer his question? What Jesus is not saying here, I don't think Jesus is just being disconnected and doesn't want to get into this guy's life. What he's not saying is like, oh man, that's really messy. I don't know if I want to get into those details of your life. I don't know if I want to, don't bring me into that. No, Jesus had no problem getting into the messiest parts of people's lives, sometimes more than people were looking for, right? So that's not what Jesus was saying in his response. He also wasn't saying, oh man, I don't know if I'm qualified to deal with that. That's a tough one. I don't know if I'm really the guy for you. Maybe you should find someone who knows a little bit more about the law. That's not what Jesus is saying either. So why is Jesus giving this response? Why this kind of deflection? I think it's because what Jesus was teaching directly before this was really powerful and really amazing, right? And so let's jump back for a second and read what Jesus had just taught, some of what Jesus was just teaching in verse 8. In verse 8, Jesus says, I tell you, whoever publicly acknowledges me before others, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But whoever disowns me before others will be disowned before the angels of God. And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven. But anyone who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. So what Jesus has just said in here, and there's a lot of like biblical language in here that can be hard to understand, but what Jesus has just done is he's connected himself to a teaching in Daniel chapter 7, this prophecy of the Son of Man who would have a kingdom that would never be destroyed, that this kingdom would be lasting forever. It's connecting him to God directly. Not just a Son of Man like you and I, that we are humans, but beyond that he is the Son of Man. And Jesus just told this crowd that he is that Son of Man that was spoken of hundreds of years earlier. That's pretty amazing. That's a pretty extreme claim. That's the kind of thing that if you said at that point, it would get you killed. And it did get Jesus killed. That's what Jesus had just claimed. And then, after that, this man decides, I should ask him a question. Yeah, Jesus, I hear that you're the Son of Man. I get it. Daniel, okay. Yeah. But what about my money? Right? What about my inheritance? Like, my brother's being mean to me, and I need to get some property out of this. He's being a jerk. Can you help me out here, Jesus? And Jesus' response is, what are we talking about right now? That's what you want to ask me? I just told you, I am the Son of Man. I am God, the creator of the universe, here, standing face to face with you. And right now, you have an opportunity to ask me anything. And you want to ask me how you can get some more money? Jesus saying, there's something missing here. There's a block here. There's something keeping you from seeing what's being said in front of you. There's something keeping you from seeing the God of the universe right in front of you. And Jesus analyzes this perfectly and jumps into a teaching right after this. He tells the man what the issue is here. Not the issue that he was asking about and wanting help with, but the issue that he needed to hear about. Jesus tells him, and then he gives a parable to explain further. In verse 15, he says, then he said to them, watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And he told him this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build even bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." So, summary. Jesus tells this crowd, "I am the Son of God, the Son of Man, prophesied about hundreds of years ago, come to bring salvation, come to bring a new kingdom." And the man asks, "Yeah, but what about my money?" And in this parable, Jesus is teaching the crowd a very important lesson. That when we get caught up in building our own kingdom, when we get caught up in our own possessions, that it can become a blocking point. It can become a barrier or a wall that keeps us from seeing the things that are most important, that keeps us from seeing the real meaning in life. That these possessions become a block to the bigger purpose that God is actually leading us to. This man in the story that he's telling, in this parable, is successful and has tons of crops, which in that time in an agricultural society was everything, right? He was set up for life. He was successful already. But then he became more successful, and he said, "Now that I have even more crops, what am I going to do with it? I better build even bigger barns. We're going to tear down my little barns and build even bigger barns so that I can have even more." And he puts all this time and all this energy and all this effort into it. And Jesus could have ended the story a little bit differently, right? Jesus could have said, he spent all this time and all this energy building these things up, and he got it, and then he finally realized, once he had it, that it wasn't as important as he thought it was. Because we all have stories like that, don't we? We all have these ideas of things that we wish we had, and once we finally get it, then we'll be content. That's the lie that we buy into it often, isn't it? That's such an easy lie to buy into, that once I have that job, once I get that salary, once I get that house, once I get that car, once I get to this point in my life, then I'll be content. And oftentimes we hear stories over and over again of people who finally get there and find out, that wasn't quite it. That wasn't quite it. That didn't really do for me what I thought it was. It wasn't really as fulfilling as I thought it would be. There's a story many of you have probably heard of John Rockefeller, who, if you don't know, was an incredibly rich man. He, at the time that he was living, the peak of his wealth, he had a net worth of about 1% of the entire U.S. economy. He owned 90% of all the oil and gas industry of his time. So compared to today's richest people, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, he made them look like chumps, okay? He had so much money. And he famously was asked in an interview, "Mr. Rockefeller, how much money is enough? How do you know when you've gotten to enough money?" And his answer was, "Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more." Because when we're looking to these possessions, when we're looking to wealth to bring that fulfillment, to bring that content to our lives, what we find out over and over again when we get to that spot is it didn't quite do it, and there's always something more. There's always just a little bit more. And Jesus could have ended the story with him learning that lesson, but Jesus didn't pull back any punches. Instead, what he said is this man spent all of his life trying to build up these barns, earn all this money, finally get to where he thought he would be content, where he thought he would be happy, and then he died. And then he died. No chance to learn the lesson. All of that for what? And that is the warning that Jesus is giving to these people. That you can spend all your time chasing the wrong things, not be fulfilled, not be content, because you've built your riches for yourself and you have not become rich towards God. That all of that effort, striving for those things to bring fulfillment to your life, striving for those things to bring contentment to your life, actually became a wall, between you and the thing that would actually bring you contentment, that would actually bring fulfillment. The truth is that as this man in the story was focused on his possessions, he missed the bigger purpose. So Jesus' answer to this man who's asking about the inheritance is this: be rich towards God. Be rich towards God. Now, you are probably asking the right question right now, which is, what does that mean? How do you do that? What does it look like to live a life that is rich toward God? And the good news is we don't have to guess, because Jesus goes into some teaching directly after this that gives us some clues of what it looks like to live rich towards God. And I'm sure we could spend hours and hours and hours talking about exactly what that looks like. But this morning I want to look at just three things that Jesus talks about in this next section to help us understand what it looks like for us to be people who live richly in God. And if you're following along in your notes, this is where that picks up, and you can add that in as we go along. So the first one is this: people who are rich toward God, people who are rich in God, worry less. Read verses 22 through 26 with me. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? But who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest?" People who are rich in God worry less. Now, I don't think what Jesus is saying here is that anytime you worry, any anxiety that you have, all of it is necessarily connected to your possessions, and you just must not love God enough if you have worry or anxiety. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. I think Jesus has a more empathetic and more sophisticated response to our anxiety and worry. But the truth is that our wealth and our possessions can become a source of anxiety for us. Isn't that true? That when we make our wealth and possessions the thing that we're looking to fulfill us, it makes the barrier, it makes that wall that we were talking about between us and Jesus and the thing that actually gives us fulfillment. And then we start to worry about, like, what if I lose it? What if I can't maintain it? What if I don't keep it? What if somebody takes advantage of me because of what I have? What if I never get enough? What if I never live up to my potential? Start to have these questions that build anxiety and worry in us when that becomes our source of fulfillment. And on the other end, it may not be that you're rich and you have so much money. It may be that you're struggling financially and struggling to get to a place where you need to be. And it's easy for me to stand up here and say that, oh, it's not that important. Just don't worry about it. Yeah, it's easy for you to say when you have a house and when you have money and when you're okay. But what about me when I'm struggling financially? What about me when I'm worried about my basic necessities? I'm not trying to build larger barns. I'm trying to have a home. It makes sense. It's valid to have anxiety and fear about that. And I don't think Jesus is discounting that. He's not saying that it's unimportant and that you don't need it at all. What he's saying is, rely on me to provide it for you. Trust in me to provide it for you. Come to me and I will take care of your needs because I love you way more than the birds and I take care of them. The point is not that those things are unimportant and that these basic necessities are like, just forget about them. The point is that if you're looking to them for fulfillment, it will cause more anxiety in your life. But if you can remove that barrier and look to Jesus fully, he will provide, and in his provision, give you his peace. You'll experience God's peace as you're able to remove that barrier. I think it's important to understand that the physical things, that material is not evil. That is not what Jesus teaches. There is a sect, basically a Christian cult in the 2nd century called Gnosticism. They're Gnostics who are teaching a number of different things that the church determined was heretical long ago. But one of the things that they taught is that everything physical, everything material is evil, and everything and the spiritual thing is the only thing that matters. And one thing that came out to for them was that if when we die, we'll leave all this worldly stuff behind, we'll leave the flesh behind, we'll leave everything physical behind, and then we'll go be these floating spirits in the heavenly realm somewhere. But that is not what the church has taught historically. That is not the teaching of Jesus or the teaching of the Bible. It's not that all physical is evil. It's that God made everything material. In Genesis 1, we read that he created the heavens and the earth, and he said that it is good. And that the physical world that he created is good. And the truth is that one day he's going to recreate the earth. He's going to bring a new earth and a new kingdom, the Bible teaches us. And it will be physical, and that you and I will be resurrected in physical bodies that are made new and created to be the way that they were always meant to be. There's a really great book about this by a guy named N.T. Wright, and it's called Surprised by Hope, and I just reread it recently. And there's a really great quote I'd like to read from that. It says, the point of the resurrection is that the present bodily life is not valueless just because it will die. What you do with your body in the present matters because God has a great future in store for it. What you do in the present by painting, preaching, singing, sewing, praying, teaching, building hospitals or digging wells, campaigning for justice, writing poems, caring for the needy, loving your neighbor as yourself, all of that will last into God's future. These activities are not simply ways of making the present life a little less beastly, a little more bearable, until the day when I leave it all behind altogether. No, they are a part of what we call building for God's kingdom. So the truth is that the things in your life, there's value to them. There's importance to them. Jesus gets it. He gets what you need. He sees what you need, and he wants to provide it for you. He just wants to make sure that you're not turning it into a wall, into a barrier between yourself and him. Because when you do that, it will create anxiety in your life. It will create more worry, more fear than you have to live with. And that there is hope for you. That you can live in God's peace, regardless of what you own. So people who are rich toward God will worry less. And the second point is that people who are rich in God seek his kingdom. We don't seek to build our own kingdom, but we seek to build God's kingdom because what we're doing right now matters. That God's kingdom is here and it's growing, and someday he will come to finish that process. And in the meantime, you and I get to be a part of that process in building the kingdom that God has created. Read verses 27 through 31 with me. It says, "Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the fields, which is here today and tomorrow is just thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan, they run after all such things. And your Father knows what you need. He knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. The truth is that when we live rich towards God, not only do we start to experience his peace, but we're also set on a mission. He also gives us something that will ultimately be fulfilling to us. When we make the possessions that barrier between us, believing that they will fulfill us, it causes us more anxiety, but it also separates us from that thing that actually brings fulfillment to our life, which is a life with Jesus and also on mission with Jesus to build his kingdom. That when we think about everything that we own, every possession that we own as part of building God's kingdom, it gives so much purpose and meaning to everything that we have. That you are no longer just somebody who owns things trying to hold on to them, but now you've become a steward of those things. And the question for the steward isn't how much can I get? The question for a good steward isn't like, do I have the right things or not the right things? The question of the steward is, how do I use every single thing that I have, every single dollar that I have, not for it to build my own kingdom, but to build God's kingdom? Anybody can figure out how to use their own gifts and their own wealth and their own possessions for their own kingdom. Everybody does it. It's easy. But the question for the steward is, how do I use all of this for God's kingdom? Which brings me to the last thing, which is people who are rich in God detach from possessions. Detach from possessions. Read this next verse with me. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Sell your possessions. It's kind of a crazy thing to say, isn't it? It's kind of a scary thing for Jesus to say. Again, it's not about the possessions. I think the question of a good steward, I think it can be easy to think that the best thing to do, according to Jesus, and we read other stories where Jesus tells people to sell every single thing they have and to go and live on the streets. Like we can be tempted to be like, is that what we're all supposed to do? Are we all missing the point here? Are we all living this Christian life wrong? Are none of us loving God enough because we all own homes and because we live in apartments and because we have food and and we have money and jobs? Are we doing the wrong thing? Should we just sell everything we have? That's not Jesus' teaching for every person. I think it's much deeper than that. I think there's much more to it. I think first of all, what we just talked about is that Jesus doesn't call every single person to sell their possessions. He calls some of us to keep our possessions and be good stewards of them and figure out how to use every possession we have to the kingdom of God. That's the kingdom seeking part. He doesn't tell every person he interacts with, sell every single thing you have. He tells some people, go back and live your life, work your job, love your family, live in your town, and be a light for me now. He does tell some people to sell everything they have. And this morning, that's not my message to you, but I would encourage you that in your relationship with God, you should figure out if that is what he's calling you to, because he might be calling you to sell every single thing you have and move somewhere where you can share the gospel with the most vulnerable people in the world. He may be calling you to that. He's not necessarily calling every single one of us to that. But I do believe that one thing that is important here for us to not miss in this passage is that he does tell us to sell our possessions. Not because the possessions are evil. He doesn't say burn your possessions because they're bad. He says, it might be good for you if you believe maybe you're not hearing from God, you're not seeing God as clearly. It might be that you've created this wall between you and Jesus that's blocking you from hearing him how you used to and seeing Jesus the way that you need to and see the path that he's calling you to. And what you need to do, what you and I need to do, is create intentional practices in our lives that help tear down that wall regularly. And one thing that Jesus offers here, almost as a sacrament, as this physical practice, is to sell something you have. Not because you don't need it anymore, not because you need to declutter your house, not because you need to upgrade and get something better. And in this section, it's not even really about the poor. He does say sell it and give it to the poor. But it's not really for the sake of the poor in this moment, although Jesus cares very much about the poor and calls us in other places very much to give to the poor and to lift them up. But in this case, it's not really about that. In this case, it's because you and I have created a barrier and it needs to come down. And one practice that you can bring into your life is to sell something. Sell something. Sell something that you like. Sell something that you use. Because by creating that practice, we align the spiritual reality of our life with our physical reality, and there's power in that. Again, I'm not trying to say that this is a new sacrament that you need to do, but what I am saying is that in a similar way, we take part in baptism and in communion like we did this morning. And Jesus commands us to do those things. Again, not because the juice is so special. I've done communion with middle schoolers with Cheetos and Kool-Aid, right? It's not because the juice is so special or because the water is special and it somehow cleanses you in a new way. It's because there's a spiritual reality that's happened in your life, not because of what you've done, but because of what Jesus has done. And we take part in this physical practice that aligns our physical world with the spiritual world. And Jesus does something powerful in that, because when those things are aligned, it removes the barriers that keep us from seeing Jesus. So my question this morning is, what might the Holy Spirit be convicting in you has become a barrier, keeping you from seeing Jesus clearly? And might it be that there's some possessions that you've been holding on to, looking to them for fulfillment and contentment? And it's been causing you anxiety and stress. It's been causing you to build your kingdom instead of God's. If that's the case, I'd encourage you to try it. Just give it a try. Try selling something and see how God works in your heart and brings you closer to him. In that process, like in baptism, we start to see that Jesus is victorious over all things. And it's not by you and I and our works and our ability and our things and what we can do and our gifts that saves us. You and I against death had no chance. We were in a losing battle. But Jesus came and he conquered death. He died the death that you and I deserved. But then he rose again, conquering death in a way that none of us ever could. And then he invites us into it. He invites us to join in his victory, to join in his kingdom, and we become inheritors. We become the ones who inherit God's kingdom as a result. So let's build God's kingdom together. Will you pray with me? God, thank you for Jesus. Thank you that you didn't leave us on our own to figure things out, but you came and you conquered death in our place, and that you invite us into that. God, thank you that we don't have to try to find other ways to find fulfillment in our lives, other ways to find contentment, but that, God, we can lean into you and that you give us that. God, thank you that you give us peace. And thank you that you give us such a beautiful world that you created and you said was good. And you gave us purpose in this world. So God, would you help align our physical world and our spiritual reality and bring us closer to you so that we can hear what you were calling us to, so that we can see the direction that you're leading us in. God, we love you and pray this all in your Son's name. Amen.